14 of the darkest years have rolled by. The Bhutanese refugees continue to languish in the 7 UNHCR-assisted camps in eastern Nepal. The wounds inflicted on them, prior to their eviction from Bhutan, remain unhealed, and the tribulation that they have undergone continues to haunt them. This is Asha. She was on the verge of being raped by members of the Royal Bhutan Army when her mother suddenly arrived on the scene. The mother went down on her knees begging for mercy. The army's response was to grab her, and one by one they raped her. She was then warned by the army either to leave the country forthwith or face similar rapings in the days to come. Traumatized, she opted to flee for safety and soon arrived in a border town in India. From there, she made her way to a makeshift refugee camp in Maidar in eastern Nepal. As tales of such atrocity began to spread far and wide, Amnesty International arrived at Maidar camp and started to document the cases of human rights violation of the Bhutanese fleeing en masse from Bhutan. In a comprehensive AI report entitled Bhutan, Human Rights Violations Against the Nepali-Speaking Population in the South, a rape victim tells of her experience. Quote, "About 200 people were arrested that day. We were all herded together outside in the school compound and made to sit with hands tied behind backs and heads down. Army personnel then selected 8 young women, including me, and dragged us outside. Those who resisted were kicked, and when some of the women fell down, the soldiers hit them with rifle butts. I was slapped, forced onto the floor, and raped by 5 soldiers." Unquote. The US State Department's 1994 country report on Bhutan has expressed similar concern about the royal government's human rights practices, including, quote, "implementation of the 1985 Citizenship Act and the failure to prosecute security force members who committed rape, torture and other abuses in the name of enforcing the Citizenship Act." Unquote. As pointed out in the US report, the issue of nationality forms the crux of the Bhutanese crisis. The 1985 Act, which the government unilaterally amended, is a retroactive law designed to disenfranchise southern Bhutanese and safeguard the totalitarian rule of the monarch. Commenting on the 1985 Act, experienced lawyer Tang Lei Lee in the International Journal on Refugee Law 1998 has stated that, quote, "The 1985 Citizenship Act is a denationalization decree in the retroactive formulation of Section 3 and the retroactive operation of its provisions on the acquisition of nationality. It is denationalization based on racial or ethnic grounds specially aimed at the Nepali-speaking Lotsampas." Unquote. Implementing this denationalization decree through a new census policy in 1988, the government created 7 different categories for southern Bhutanese. As a result, tens of thousands of southern Bhutanese who were bona fide citizens under the former king, Jigme Dorji Wangchuk, were rendered stateless under the present king, Jigme Singhi Wangchuk. It was against this background that Mr. Tek Nath Rijal and his co-counsellor submitted an appeal to the king. The king's response caused widespread shock. Mr. Rijal, an elected representative of the southern Bhutanese, was arrested and imprisoned. After 3 days, the king ordered Mr. Rijal's release, stripped him of his councillorship, and compelled him to leave the capital, Thimphu, immediately. Subsequently, other racist policies were aggressively implemented, further depriving the southern Bhutanese of their rights regarding language, dress, and culture. To address the rapidly deteriorating human rights situation in Bhutan, a human rights movement was launched, which was unceremoniously crushed by the authorities. With the human rights and student leaders shackled and behind bars, the Bhutanese in exile in India formed the Bhutan People's Party and launched a mass demonstration for democracy in Bhutan. With unexpected events unfolding, the king, speaking to the India press, said, quote, "I believe that every problem, political, economic, or social, can be resolved through sincere dialogue. I am ready for it." That is bogus. They made 13 demands, then 9 more. Most are on problems we don't have in Bhutan. I agree with our boys in the south that the representation is not fair. It definitely needs to be changed in accordance with the demographic distribution in the districts. After several tactical moves, the king, who was ready for political dialogue, imposed martial rule in southern Bhutan, leading to many instances of torture, looting, rape, and extrajudicial killing. Thousands of people began to flee to India for safety. Next, a motion was proposed in the Rubber Stamp Assembly, and a resolution passed to evict activists and supporters of the democracy movement in Bhutan. Immediately, the government issued orders to such families and began to evict them. As a final act, voluntary migration forms were produced, and under extreme duress, southern Bhutanese were forced to sign them. They were then thrown out of the country. Consequently, the exodus of Bhutanese into Nepal increased by leaps and bounds. When this unexpected burden suddenly landed on Nepal's doorstep, Prime Minister G.P. Koirala requested UNHCR for humanitarian assistance to help Nepal avert a crisis. UNHCR, supported by several other agencies, started providing relief to the refugees. Soon afterwards, Nepal's Prime Minister Koirala raised the issue of Bhutanese refugees with the King of Bhutan in the SAARC summit held in Dhaka, Bangladesh, in 1993. The King's response was acrid, alleging that Nepal was harbouring elements working against him. Assessing the King's tenacity, on his return to Nepal from Bangladesh, Prime Minister Koirala called on members of various diplomatic missions in Kathmandu and briefed them on the development in Dhaka. He advised them of his intention to raise the issue of Bhutanese refugees at the World Conference on Human Rights in Vienna. When this news hit the press, Bhutan immediately agreed to attend talks. Quiet diplomacy began. Eventually, in July 1993, a Bhutan-Nepal ministerial-level joint committee was formed, which placed Bhutanese refugees into one of 4 different categories. This decision to classify Bhutanese refugees according to 4 categories met with severe criticism from many quarters. After a few rounds of bilateral parley, Bhutan started to use evading tactics and the talks made little progress. Frustrated by this development, Mr. Tahir Ali, UNHCR country representative to Nepal, said, quote, "The 2 governments need to engage in the serious pursuit of a solution, avoiding legalistic and non-negotiable postures," unquote. Similarly, Mr. K.P. Sharma Oli, Home Minister of Nepal and a member of the ministerial-level joint committee, said, quote, "The Bhutanese side showed no real interest towards solving the problem. They do not want to move ahead. We could not agree or disagree on whether to hold another round of talks. In time, Bhutan will realise that to keep talking is not important. All we want is a solution. Disenchanted by Bhutan's flippant attitude, the Nepal government decided to explore the possibility of trilateral talks involving India, failing which it would internationalise the Bhutanese refugee issue. Bhutan, however, showed little concern at this proclamation by Nepal. Unfazed, it continued to evade bilateral talks and continued to pursue delaying tactics. Meanwhile, Nepal was becoming mired in a constitutional crisis, and the Bhutanese refugee issue was being eclipsed. To bring the issue back into focus and press for repatriation of the refugees both safely and with dignity, a peace march to Bhutan from Damak in Nepal was planned by Bhutanese human rights activists and refugees under the banner of Appeal Movement Coordinating Council. The council succeeded in drawing the attention of regional governments, the European Union, and a host of other countries to the waning issue of the refugees. This peaceful march on entering Bhutan was ruthlessly crushed by order of the king. Undaunted, the Bhutanese in exile relentlessly continued to pressurise for an early resolution of the refugee crisis. Although intermittent, international pressure on Bhutan continued to mount. To get a first-hand picture of the problem, Britain's Princess Anne visited the Bhutanese refugees in eastern Nepal in November 2000. That same year, Madame Ogata, chief of UNHCR, visited Bhutan and held talks with the king. She later visited the refugees in Nepal and spoke of the encouraging outcome of her talks with the king. The UN Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women and Committee on the Rights of the Child has urged Bhutan to step up its effort to conduct negotiations with the government of Nepal and to collaborate with the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in order to find a prompt, just and durable solution to the situation of Bhutanese women, girls and children living in the refugee camps in Nepal, and to ensure repatriation and resettlement of returnees in safety and dignity to their place of origin or choice. The Indo-Bhutan Friendship Society, under the leadership of former Union Minister of India, Shri Satya Prakash Malviya, has been urging Bhutan to repatriate Bhutanese refugees and execute democratic reforms in Bhutan. The European Union has similarly passed a resolution calling on the government of Bhutan to make practical preparations for the UNHCR-supervised return of the refugees and to safeguard the rights of minority on its territory. It has also noted that Bhutan's Citizenship Act 1985 may need to be modified. In 2000 AD, when the governments of the USA and EU, together with the UN, exerted strong pressure on Bhutan, it finally yielded, resulting in the formation of the Bhutan-Nepal Joint Verification Team, the JVT. In March 2001, the JVT started the verification process of refugees in Kudunabari camp, and almost 2 years later, the results of the process were announced. The results, flawed as they were, drew criticism from several governments, including European Union and the US. Leading international human rights organizations and NGOs also declared the results unfair and invalid. The team included in the 347 people in the criminals and terrorists category children presently studying in primary level in Kudunabari Camp School, immediately calling into question its competence to perform the task with which it had been entrusted. Numbers placed in the other categories are displayed. Bona fide Bhutanese citizens, 2.5% of the refugees. So-called voluntary migrants, 70% of the refugees. And so-called non-Bhutanese, 24% of the refugees. December 22nd, 2003 was a day of great despair to the Bhutanese refugees. After waiting almost 1.5 decades for justice, Bhutan agreed to take back its citizens, but spelt out very harsh and unacceptable conditions for their return. Once the refugees learnt of Bhutan's desire to keep the returnees as slaves and prisoners, they protested very strongly. In the early hours of December 23rd, 2003, the Bhutanese JVT members left for Bhutan unilaterally, terminating the bilateral exercise. It is disturbing that Bhutan's king, during his January 2005 visit to India, proclaimed that refugees in UNHCR camps in eastern Nepal are not Bhutanese citizens and could have been living in India or Nepal previously. This clearly reveals that the king is not willing to resolve the refugee crisis and is blatantly ignoring the findings of the Bhutan-Nepal Joint Verification Team. Against the backdrop of the failed Bhutan-Nepal bilateral process and the escalating insurgents in Nepal, UNHCR headquarters in Geneva has now begun to focus on a multi-pronged approach to resolve the Bhutanese refugee crisis. In a meeting with the press, Mr. Abraham, UNHCR country representative to Nepal, said, quote, "UNHCR is ready to take over and seek a permanent and comprehensive solution for Bhutanese refugees. The first priority is repatriation of refugees. The second, integrating into Nepali society, and the third, assimilating in other countries." Unquote. Similarly, the prominent INGOs in a joint global appeal have stated that, quote, "The timing is opportune for Bhutan and Nepal's donors to convene an international conference to devise a comprehensive solution to the refugee situation that meets international standards and gives due consideration to each of the durable solutions: voluntary repatriation, local integration, and third country resettlement. As already revealed, the lives of the Bhutanese in exiles hangs in the balance. This is just one side of the coin. Let's now turn to the other side and see what is happening inside Bhutan. The king claims that everything is sound and serene in Bhutan, except the problem in the south. However, the true picture is completely different. When Mr. Rongtong Kunle Dorji, chairman of the Druk National Congress, green-flagged the struggle for democracy in eastern Bhutan, the king came down heavily on them. A Buddhist monk, Karma Gomchen, was shot dead by the chief district officer. Protesters, including women, were arrested and severely tortured. The highest lama of the Nyingmapa sect, predominant in eastern Bhutan, was arrested and imprisoned. His Holiness Tinle Yoger is presently serving a prison sentence at Rabuna Central Prison in Wangdi Phodrang. To this day, Bhutan continues to engage in repression. The problem now exists of northeast Indian insurgents in Bhutan. Hundreds of political prisoners continue to suffer in the dark dungeons in Rabuna and Chemgang. The southern Bhutanese continue to be denied access to education, health and employment. And most significantly, the king has relocated northern Bhutanese and settled them in the landed properties confiscated from the southern Bhutanese who are presently living as refugees. Despite this situation, the elderly members of Bhutanese refugee community declared on 17th December 2004 their intention of undertaking a march to Bhutan to meet the king for resolution of the problem. When the older generation is still endeavouring to appeal to the king and seek a peaceful solution, the younger generation, which forms 50% of the 130,000 refugee population, deems the efforts of their elders to be futile and remains deeply distressed. Describing the ground reality in the Bhutanese refugee camps, Father P.S. Amalraj, South Asia Director of Jesuit Refugee Service, says, quote, "The camps reveal the mood of the refugees. They are islands of despair and frustration. Compelled to live in these islands of despair for the last 14 years, together with the lack of any hope for resolution of the refugee crisis, large numbers of disillusioned youths suddenly found solace in an underground revolutionary Communist Party of Bhutan, Marxist, Leninist and Maoist. Alarmed by the formation of extreme left-wing Bhutanese party, the king, in his recent press conference in New Delhi, India, said that the Maoist insurgency in Nepal has posed a real threat for Bhutan. Speaking further on the situation in Nepal, he said that, quote, "Maoists have total control, more or less, of the whole country. There is a real threat of the Maoist situation becoming much more serious than it is today." Unquote. On 1st February 2005, the King of Nepal dismissed the government and assumed executive powers. The royal takeover and the subsequent imposition of a state of emergency has further fanned the flames of uncertainty in Nepal. Where the political future of Nepal lies, no one can say. But the unfolding events in and around Nepal are likely to influence the future course of the Bhutanese struggle, which may lead to a harrowing outcome. Under the growing cloud of these developments, continuing to hold more than 1 lakh of Bhutanese refugees in camps in eastern Nepal is inviting further strife. We have already seen how conflicts compound and sufferings multiply when crises are left to smoulder. The case of Bhutanese refugees is no exception. Before the Bhutanese struggle spawns a violent extremist movement, and before Bhutan begins to bleed like Nepal, sucking the Bhutanese refugees into the maelstrom of violent political conflict, the international community has no alternative but to act.
जबसम्म अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय जगतले यस समस्यालाई समाधान गर्नको लागि पहल गरिदिदैन, तबसम्म यो 15 वर्षदेखि अति नै दयनीय अवस्थामा जीवन बिताइरहेका शरणार्थीहरूको यिनीहरूको जीवन प्रति एउटा नयाँ कुनै आयाम आउनको लागि कुनै बाटो देखिदैन। यो समस्या समाधान हुनको लागि अन्तर्राष्ट्रियकरण हुनै पर्छ।
Rigid and unfair position on the repatriation of refugees and its disinterest to bring about democratic reforms, true democratic reforms, the only alternative is the intervention of international community.
Nepal doesn't have leverage over Bhutan, and Bhutan doesn't want to take back refugees. Now international community should directly intervene in the refugee issues and offer durable solution of Bhutanese refugees.
That is the only solution at the moment. Unless it is the issue is tackled by a multilateral approach, we don't see a solution to the Bhutanese refugee problem.
The older generation of Bhutanese refugees has already undergone immense ordeal and suffering. The timely and judicious intervention by the international community can spare the younger generation from a similar fate. It can open windows of opportunity for that generation, enabling its members to lead lives that have a purpose, lives that are productive and fulfilled, lives that will make positive contributions to the societies of which they are members. We trust in the convictions and strength of the international community, and we further trust that its course of action will amply demonstrate that our confidence is justified.